All right, good afternoon. My name is Sonja Schmid. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society here at Virginia Tech, and I'm excited to welcome you to Siren. This is the 27th event in a series of seminars, talks, and discussion on nuclear emergency response. The series is part of my NSF Career Award on globalizing nuclear emergency response, and in the spirit of this type of grant, we emphasize the importance of both research and education in the area of nuclear emergency preparedness and response. So all our Siren speakers are meeting with graduate students as part of their engagement, and whenever possible, we plan to provide access to a recording of their lectures. Siren, the seminar on interdisciplinary research and education in nuclear emergency response, is generously supported by Virginia Tech's Office of the Vice President for the National Capital Region and Virginia Tech's Policy Strategic Growth Area. Many thanks to the staff of the Virginia Tech Research Center's Executive Briefing Center and the IT team for their round-the-clock support. And finally, thanks to the students, staff, and faculty in STS for helping to make this happen. Please note that our next event, and probably the last, will take place on Thursday, April 18th, here at noon, and our guest will be Frank Kitching from Calian Nuclear Business Development in Canada, who will discuss the value of realism in nuclear emergency response exercises. Invitations will go out later this week. We are live streaming this talk, and as of this morning, we've had over 40 remote participants signed up. These attendees are joining us not only from our main campus in Blacksburg, U.S. universities near and far, federal agencies and national labs, but also from institutions abroad. Welcome. If you're watching us online and would like to submit a question to our speaker, please send an email indicating your name and affiliation to siren@vt.edu. And now, finally, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. David Crawley is the Pooled Inventory Management, PIM, Program Manager for Southern Nuclear, a subsidiary of Southern Company that operates the nuclear facilities owned by Alabama Power and Georgia Power. David began his career in 1987 at Ingalls Shipbuilding in Pascagoula, Mississippi, as an engineer. He progressed through the ranks to become the lead main propulsion engineer for new U.S. Navy Aegis-guided missile cruisers and destroyers. In 1997, he accepted a position with Southern Company Services in Birmingham, Alabama, as a design engineer providing support to the Edwin I. Hatch nuclear power plant. And he transitioned to Southern Nuclear in 2002. Prior to being appointed to his current position at Southern Nuclear, David served as the company's project manager for the Strategic Alliance for Flex Emergency Response, the SAFER program, the U.S. nuclear industry's emergency response to natural disasters impacting commercial nuclear sites. This position now reports directly to him. And throughout his 17-year career with Southern Nuclear, David has held leadership positions in nuclear oversight, quality assurance, procurement, and business development. He has also served as a qualified member in Southern Nuclear's emergency response organization. David has represented Southern Nuclear on various industry committees with the Electric Power Research Institute and served on industry review teams with the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. David is a 1987 graduate of Mississippi State University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. And what David did not tell us in this biography is that in 2016, together with two colleagues, he won a top innovative practice, a TIP award, the nuclear industry's highest honor for their National Safer Response Center solution and its impact on the entire industry. They had developed the strategy as the industry's off-site response to beyond design basis external event preparedness. More specifically, they set up two secure 80,000 square foot emergency response centers, one in Memphis and one in Phoenix. Each of these facilities has 5 sets of equipment that can be transported by truck or air to a plant site anywhere in the United States within 24 hours. Last May, David was kind enough to host me and a postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Bashak Saraj-Lasavre, at the Phoenix Center, where we spent the day learning about the SAFER strategy. And today, you have a chance to learn about SAFER as well, and why the industry awarded David's team its highest award for a special, first-of-a-kind creative solution. Please join me in welcoming David Crawley.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I hope I live up to a tenth of what you just said. So, thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to give you some background on what the United States has done in response to the Fukushima event that happened back in 2011 in Japan. I think you all are aware of it. I won't go into the details of the event, but I do want to give you a kind of a broad perspective of what the industry has done, working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as well as the Nuclear Energy Institute. But I will focus more on the off-site emergency response. I'll give you a big picture, and then we'll go into kind of how the off-site response works. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time and ask them. So the U.S. response to Fukushima, again, as I mentioned, the NRC got very much involved when this event was going on in Japan. Teams were sent over to understand, what was happening, how they could assist, but also in trying to understand what are the lessons from this event that need to be carried back to the U.S. commercial fleet. And so from that, as a part of those lessons learned, the NRC issued an order to all nuclear licensees called, it's an emergency action order, which means we had to take action very, very quickly. It was EA 12049. From there, the Nuclear Energy Institute said, okay, how are we going to approach this order? And they knew it was coming out, and so what they did was they got together based on these lessons learned and developed a strategy on how to implement this order across the U.S. nuclear fleet. And that strategy is called FLEX, and what it stands for is a diverse and flexible coping strategy. And it'll make more sense as we go through this, but it means very flexible. I think Dan was mentioning earlier to me about what happens when you get outside of your procedures. That's what this strategy is all about, is staying flexible and responding to what the situation is giving you and having the tools to mitigate the effects of what's going on. So as a result of that, the FLEX strategy further ensures that the U.S. nuclear sites are prepared for beyond design basis external events. And what we mean by that are earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, blizzards, extreme cold, volcanic activity, so anything that is occurring that is above what the actual plant was designed for, okay? Now, these plants are designed for all of these activities, but if you'll recall what happened at Fukushima, it was much greater than what was recorded history, okay? So we designed these plants to a threshold. What has recorded history showed us? I believe Fukushima was like 500 years of recorded history, and they designed that plant to the worst case. Well, these are events that go even above that. So what we've put in place is to be able to handle anything that exceeds what the original design capabilities and keep these plants in a safe place. Key aspect is that we are preventing this event from damaging the site such that we have a radioactive release. Everything is a preventive measure such that we're not responding to an event where the reactor has gone south on us. We're responding to keep it from going south. That's the whole impetus behind this approach. Okay? So here's what the order looks like. It's about 3 more pages deeper than this. But here's some of the core tenets of the order that the NRC put out. But the key point here is that it's to maintain or restore core cooling to the reactor, the containment building, or the spent fuel pool. Okay, that's the key functions that this program is all about, that this order is all about, and what was put in place across the U.S. Nuclear industry. So 3 phases to it. Phase 1, use of plant installed equipment and resources. So what does that mean? That means design changes that needed to be done such that they could ensure that the core cooling is maintained, or containment or spent fuel functions. Also phase 2. So from there, once we had design changes implemented at the plant, phase 2 was transition over into on-site emergency equipment. So all of these sites across the United States have their own emergency backup equipment that's portable, that they pull out of facilities and get to the reactor and hook up to the to ensure they hook up to different connections to ensure that these functions are maintained. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. The phase 2 is the on-site emergency equipment. And what I want to talk to you about today is the phase 3 equipment. That's the off-site emergency equipment. And I'll talk to you about the deployment, what kind of equipment we've got, how much of equipment we got, what its capabilities are, and all those sorts of things. Okay, so phase 3, off-site emergency equipment. All right, so when we first started this, the nuclear industry said, all right, who are we going to get to put this program in place for us? Well, the nuclear industry already has a company that they've established. It's called the Pooled Equipment Inventory Company. And that's a company that was established by the nuclear industry for the nuclear industry to store and maintain long lead time equipment. So the Pooled Equipment Inventory Company teamed up with Framatome, and I'll talk more about Framatome here in a minute. But Framatome is the old Areva. Areva just went through some transitions about a year and a half ago, and the U.S. entity that we deal with of Areva is now called Framatome. All right. So they contracted with us to develop and manage a Flex National Response Center program. So that's what we'll be talking about. You'll hear the term PIM. PIM is merely the program that the Flex program is under PICO. That kind of gives you the hierarchy. So it goes PICO, PIM, SAFER. Okay, so that it's just a program within Pooled Equipment Inventory Company. All right, so a little bit about the program. It meets the requirements of NEI 1206, the Nuclear Energy Institute's document that I talked about, which established the Flex strategy, and the requirements of the order EA 12049. It was endorsed by the NRC back in September of 14. We've done 2 proof of concept drills with the NRC. We've successfully completed 2 NRC inspections with no findings. And again, it's managed by Southern Nuclear. So Southern Nuclear manages the PIM program, the SAFER program, for the entire U.S. nuclear industry. So I am a Southern Nuclear employee, and that's why I stand before you today. So let's talk a little bit about the what we have here. So we've got 2 National SAFER Response Centers. One is in Memphis, Tennessee. The other one is in Phoenix, Arizona. And as Sonia mentioned, these are large facilities, 80,000 square feet, basically, with over $55 million of custom-designed emergency equipment. I'll talk a little bit more about the equipment here in a second. Each NSRC is redundant. So if we lose one NSRC, and that, again, that's the acronym for National SAFER Response Center. If we lose one of the NSRCs, then the other NSRC is available as a backup. So one NSRC backs up the other NSRC. Again, equipment in each NSRC is duplicated. Each NSRC provides enough to support 4 reactor units or 2 nuclear sites. That was the agreement put in place with the NRC. And that was the amount of equipment that we needed to have to support those sites. Okay, so this just kind of gives you a broad picture of what it's like inside of one of these response centers. You'll see all of these basically are flatbed trailers with equipment loaded out on them ready for deployment. And I'll show you some more pictures here in a moment. Memphis would look very similar. So as Sonia mentioned, we have 4 sets of equipment that's ready to be deployed that are sitting on trailers, but we also have an extra set. That's the +1 equipment you see there in that little equation. So we have 5 sets of equipment. The extra set is for maintenance. So if we have a problem with one piece of equipment, we pull it off the line, put the maintenance spare up on the trailer such that we're always ready for deployment. And we have that at both response centers. We also have, well, before I go into that, you'll see the term generic equipment. That's a very important term. The industry decided early on that if 70% of the reactors could use a certain piece of equipment, then all the reactors in the United States participated in the purchase and procurement and the storage and maintenance of that equipment. Okay, so 70% was the threshold. That generic equipment will go to every site in the United States. Now, there was some equipment that was needed for different sites that did not meet that 70% threshold. In other words, there were 69% or less sites that needed that. So only those sites that need that equipment for non-generic participated in the purchase and storage and maintenance of that equipment. So you'll hear me use the term generic and non-generic equipment. That's what it's relating to. So every site in the United States gets different equipment. Everybody gets the generic equipment. Sites have different non-generic equipment that they participate on that will go to their sites. So that's something else we have to track and maintain. So every deployment looks different on what equipment's going to what site, okay? Another key aspect about the equipment, standardized connections, both on electrical and both on mechanical. When we use the term mechanical connectors, there we're talking about hoses and those sorts of things. So what that means is this. I can take this piece of equipment and hook it up to any site in the United States. Those sites are ready for this piece of equipment to come. Also, it's the same connectors on their phase 2. Remember the on-site emergency equipment? We all have the same connections. So if they're having a problem with their phase 2 equipment, they can pull it off the line. Phase 3, off-site equipment goes right onto the line. It has the same connection. NRC has been very adamant about inspecting this across the United States. So we know that when this equipment shows up, they can connect it to the plant sites. And that is a very, very big deal to get the United States industry to all agree to those using the same size connectors. So that was a fundamental core design parameter that had to be established early on, and it has served us well. Okay, so a little bit about the equipment design. The bulk of this equipment is first in kind. So what does that mean? Well, we had to design the equipment to fit through the cargo door of a wide-body jet. We had to design the equipment light enough so that we could fly it underneath a heavy-lift helicopter. We had to design the equipment to where we could operate it in Arctic and desert conditions. So that threw a lot of challenges at our suppliers when we were going through the specification and procurement phase of this. A lot of these people build a lot of different kinds of pumps and generators, but when you start throwing these kind of constraints on them, a lot of people were out. There was a lot of custom engineering just to figure some of this out. And I'll show you a generator here, and I'll point out some of the details just to show you what the difference is. But this really, really drove the cost of this equipment up. Another key aspect about the equipment is that it's all operated on diesel. Why diesel? Diesel is what the sites have in their emergency day tanks, okay? So typically plant sites across the United States have roughly 70 to 150,000 gallons of diesel on hand. So all equipment runs on diesel in a 12-hour refueling time, minimum 12-hour refueling time. You have a lot of equipment deployed on that site. You're going to people full-time just fueling equipment just to keep it operable. So that 12-hour runtime was very important. Now, when we send this equipment to the sites, we don't have any fuel in it because the Department of Transportation won't allow it over the roads and the FAA won't allow it in the air. Okay, so basically, when this equipment gets to the site, that's when they'll fuel it up. Any questions on fueling aspects? I will say this, I did have the vice president of Daini in Phoenix, and this was the key parameter he asked me about and challenged me on was, tell me about how you're going to refuel all this equipment. He was very relieved to know that we do have 12-hour runtime, so you don't have people out there every waking minute just moving from piece of equipment to the next piece of equipment. Yes, sir, you have a question? That's a great question. So what we also, another key piece of equipment that we actually provide is a fuel transfer pump and as well as transfer tanks, okay? So if this diesel fuel is in underground tanks, which is a lesson learned from FEMA and Hurricane Katrina, where they couldn't get fuel out of the underground tanks, we're actually supplying pumps that will actually pump. They run on a little Kohler engine that pump roughly 60 gallons a minute of fuel so that we can get that fuel out of those day tanks and things like that. So we provide a pumping system as well as tanks to do that. But we know that fuel is on site. That's an NRC requirement for them to even operate in their normal day-to-day operations. So A lot of work done on that aspect to make sure we got fuel available.
That's one of the givens. That's beyond having the fuel on site is a given.
That's correct. That is correct. That is a given that the NRC agrees to. That's correct. Good question. All right, so here are a few equipment examples. There's a water treatment system there in the top left-hand corner. That's a very important piece of equipment. It was actually manufactured for us in Israel. So we had people over there as we were going through the build phase of this thing. But this equipment here takes let me back up. Takes seawater or brackish water and makes reactor quality water. That's ultra pure water. That is water you would not want to put in your body. So it can take, again, just the dirtiest water and make water we can actually input into the reactor. The next one over there, we'll look at the green pump here, 5,000 GPM pump. That one will fill your backyard swimming pool in about 5 minutes, okay, if you got a 20 by 40. That's how much water that thing's moving, okay? And we've got, I'll tell you a little bit more of the overall capacity of the NSRC. The turbine generator up there, it's a 1 megawatt, 480 volt turbine generator. We've got 41 60 volt turbine generators. You're not seeing the picture there, but you have over 30 megawatts of capacity of power within the NSRC. That's enough to power about 24. Okay, so that tells you what we're bringing to bear. But that piece of equipment right there, we talked about custom design. If we did that with a regular diesel engine instead of a turbine, it would take up an entire flatbed trailer, and it would weigh anywhere between 43,000 and 48,000 pounds. With that gas turbine, we can get it in under 8,500 pounds. So that's some of that custom-built stuff we're talking about. Then you see a compartment dewatering pump and then a mobile ration system. This is to put bore-rated water into your pressurized water reactor. So we can make bore-rated water as well. But that's just a few pieces, a few examples of the equipment that I put up there. When it's all said and done, just to kind of put it in perspective of how much capacity that the response centers are bringing, we can pump over 222 million gallons of water a day, okay? That's how much capacity you've got when it comes to pumping. When it comes to generators, as I mentioned, roughly 30 megawatts, a little over 30 megawatts, but that's enough for 24,000 homes. I have over 9 miles of electrical cables for connections. I have over 13 miles of hoses for connections. So it's a massive response that's available to these nuclear sites. When it's all said and done, there's really enough equipment there for about 10 reactors. If you count both sets in both response centers. So it's a huge response. Sonia has seen it and really kind of taken in the magnitude of at least one of the response centers. So there's a lot that can be brought to bear for the U.S. nuclear fleet. Okay, now it's fun to have all this equipment, but you got to get it there, right? I know I've had Dave Willard from the president of the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, who was a commander or admiral of the Pacific Fleet through, and this is what he honed in on. He wanted to know how you're going to get it there, right? If anybody knows logistics, it's an admiral of the Pacific Fleet. So we have some key contracts in place with FedEx Custom Critical. Now, this is not the FedEx that you and I would use to send a package overnight. This is a white glove service that they offer to like 2 other entities in the United States for emergency response. Key part about FedEx Custom Critical, they were the first airplanes back up in the United States after 9/11. Okay, they have those kind of connections in Washington, D.C. with the FAA. So they are a key player in our response. They provide not only the tractors and the trailers to haul this across the roads, but also the wide-body jets. I will tell you that we drill with FedEx routinely, and it's always real-time drilling where they're pulling planes out of the air and what they've got available, when they can get truck drivers there to pick up the equipment. So it's all real-time type drilling when we do it with FedEx Custom Critical. As far as Helo, now, one of the key lessons learned from Fukushima was the ability to get the equipment into the site. As you recall, the tsunami, the earthquake did massive damage inside of the plant and the access into the plant, and they couldn't get equipment in place. Well, this equipment is all designed to be flown by helicopter, a heavy lift helicopter. And so in light of that, we have key contracts in place with the commercial heavy lift contractors in the United States. These guys that do, if you've ever seen them on the Discovery Channel, they're the ones fighting the fires in California, Oregon, Texas. These are the guys that fight those kind of fires. They have key contracts in place with the Department of Interior and the Department of Forestry. So we have contracts in place with those guys. We also work through the with the Air Guard through the state governor's offices. Okay, so the state governor calls out Air Guard. And last but not least, and probably the one most likely to respond, is the Department of Defense. We have key memorandums of agreements in place, signed through the NRC with the Department of Defense, U.S. Army. We've had the DOD in, their Hilo pilots, both Chinook and, let's see, what's the other one? And we've had their pilots in, walking down our equipment, walking down our slings, walking down the deployment plan, and how we move from a staging area into the sites. And so we've done a lot of work with the DOD on this. Other agreements that we have, of course, if we need things like forklifts or trucks or anything you might could think of, scissor lifts, for whatever reason, we have rental agreements in place with Sunbelt and United Rentals, which are national chains and are in every major city in the United States, as well as fuel contracts if we need those. We have those in place as well. Okay? So a little bit about the logistics. Real quick, 24-hour response to any site in the United States. That's why those contracts are so important with FedEx Custom Critical. 24-hour response to move this equipment from the National Safer Response Center to the plant site. Okay? We, again, as I stated earlier, we do drill with them on a real-time basis. Another key aspect on the logistical side of this are site response plan. And I've got a copy here. I don't know if y'all can see that. But this is a copy of a site response plan. And in this site response plan is developed for each site in the United States. And it provides all the procedures on how we engage the site, how the site engages us, all the activities that the sites need to be doing. It provides the equipment that the sites are getting. So with each site response plan, we all use the same response plan during the deployment. So if this one here is for Hope Creek, if Hope Creek is making the deployment or calling for their equipment, then we all pull the same Hope Creek response plan, and we're all working to the same procedure. It also lays in here all the drive routes, all that's already been how long it takes to drive, flights, if we've got to fly it to that site, that's all figured out. What airport is it going to? When it gets there, how many trucks the equipment's going to need to be loaded off onto, all those different things. How do you get to the staging areas from not only from the NSRCs, but from the staging area, off-site staging areas into the plant site? That's all been predetermined for every site in the United States. Tremendous amount of work on the logistical side and understanding and getting all of that in place. Okay. Another key aspect there are the FAA pre-approved flight plans. Now, when you fly external loads underneath helicopters, you have to have a flight plan because the United States, or the FAA, does not allow you to fly over any public spaces, okay, or any occupied public spaces. Those have all been predetermined routes. We've done that. We submitted our first round. We're on our, we're on our second round of reapprovals. We have to resubmit those every year to the FAA for reapproval. So that was a lot of work in D.C., sitting down with the FAA on the national level with these in place. The other piece there are fixed wing load plans. Remember I talked about generic equipment, non-generic equipment. So every site in the United States gets a different looking set of equipment. Okay, depends on what equipment they're playing on. They all get the generic equipment, but their site specific equipment is likely different. So all of those load plans, how it fits the airplane has already been predetermined. So the load masters already know where where that equipment is going in that plane when it arrives at that airport. They know where it goes in position. They know the weight on it, so we're not wasting time trying to balance that plane out. So it's very important, the amount of work that's been done with figuring out where this equipment goes in the plane. So a lot of work with FedEx Custom Critical on this piece of it. All right, as far as activation, we have 2 Safer Control Centers. They're a 24/7 call-in number that the sites utilize and call to activate. Here's another key aspect. We send trained personnel that's trained on how to operate the equipment with the equipment. So that's one of the key partnerships with Framatome. So Framatome does a lot of outage work for the nuclear sites in the United States. And so they're already badged, they're already familiar with plant, getting into the plants and what you have to do and all those sorts of things. So Framatome actually sends personnel to the response centers that we train once a year on how to operate this equipment. So we send 5 people with each set of equipment. We have roughly 5 teams trained on how to operate this equipment. Okay? All right, a little bit about the deployment. So if you'll notice there in the top left, it talks about the National Safer Response Center. That's where we'll start out, of course. But from there, we make a decision to fly or drive to that site based on what it said in the site response plan. So we move the equipment to either staging area Charlie or staging area Delta. I hope you can see that. And those are off-site staging areas. And those are what we call outside of the effective zone. They're usually 25 to 35 miles out. So we either drive it by truck or we've got to fly that equipment by plane to another regional airport that has FedEx capabilities, which has already been predetermined, offload it on a truck, and then move it to either staging area Charlie or Delta. Okay? From staging area Charlie or Delta, we're working with that site to say, okay, what piece of equipment do you want first? And then we start moving that equipment to a forward position called staging area Bravo. And you'll see it top left of the center of the target there. So that's an on-site holding area. And then from the on-site holding area, the plant moves it into position at site A, staging area A, and that's where they ultimately connect it up. So that's the way it goes, because these sites couldn't take it if we just dumped all this equipment straight in their arm. We're talking anywhere from 13 to 30 tractor trailers of equipment coming at them. So the impetus there, or the mindset, is get it to an off-site staging area that's not affected, and then start filtering that equipment in as it's needed. Again, we have 24 hours to get it to the plant site. So not only to the staging area, but on into staging area Bravo and Alpha. All right, so if we had a stranded site, it would be stuck we would have that equipment at Charlie or Delta, and we'd fly it by helicopter into staging area Bravo. That's the way. Okay, and again, that would either be through the commercial helo assets, the National Guard, or the U.S. Army. Okay, is that kind of, any questions on that slide? Yes, sir.
Understanding this is a huge emergency. What about all the security protocols? You go to a plant, the truck doesn't drive onto the site, right?
That is correct. So we are making forward calls.
David, hang on one second.
Okay.
I need to repeat the question for the online listeners. So your question was about security protocols and whether the trucks can drive onto the site. Even if it's an emergency,
That's right.
What about the security?
So what we have, initially when this all starts off, we have staging area coordinators back in Birmingham and Lynchburg obtaining personnel information and sending that forward to the site to let them know who's coming. And that, it's things like driver's license numbers, social security numbers, and all that stuff. So we still follow security protocols to an extent. Now, if it's all wiped out, but that's how far we plan into it, right? So we are calling forward. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
What's the advantage of a helicopter, 35-mile range? By the time you get the equipment where the helicopter is, then what happens? What's the advantage of the 35-mile? I was trying to hit the mic. 35-mile helicopter range, in that you've got to load it to the helicopter sling. By the time you do that, it's only 35 miles. Couldn't the truck just truck it in?
All right, great question. So what you have is what we call a stranded site. So the event has taken out the roads, You've got debris in the road. If it was an earthquake, taking out bridges and all that sorts of thing. It was, again, a lesson learned from Fukushima of trying to get the equipment in place. But good question. Thank you.
Hi, can you speak to how the decision to deploy is made, or who requests safer deployment? Is it the NRC? Is it the sites?
All right, great question. So the question was who requests, who makes the decision? As I understand it, it is the nuclear reactor operator standing at the controls. That's the way we've always played it. He has the decision making. He enters. What happens is he's going through that event. He's going down through his procedures, and it takes him to a point. Okay, and then it tells execute off-site emergency equipment response, or the safer response. That throws him into another procedure. So there are procedures that operator is going through. It is not the Nuclear Regulatory Commission who makes the decision. It's the guy that's licensed at the helm. Okay, and that's what he's tasked to do, is to protect that plant. Okay, good question. Okay. All right, a little bit about the timeline here. I won't go into a lot of detail, but hopefully this will kind of lay it out. What you'll see there is the utilities on the top of the line shown in blue, and then the bottom of the line are the responses that the SAFER team will be doing. So you'll see there at 1 hour into the event where they request the equipment, and then they start assessment. The site has to start assessing what they've got. Do our connections still work that we hook all this equipment up to? What's the damage assessment to the staging areas? What equipment do we need to get in place to start removing debris? All those different things. What time are we going to be prepared for the equipment start arriving? Then the SAFER team on the bottom there, they're going to start activating through their site response plans all of their different coordinators. They're going to stand up the NSRCs, the SAFER Control Center. They're getting in touch with FedEx Custom Critical. They're calling the helicopter providers and getting the technicians moving from around the country towards the event and getting them into those forward locations. Then the FedEx truck started arriving. We're making a decision to either move it to the airport, we've got to fly it, or we're making a decision we're going to drive it all the way through. Trucks start arriving at the staging area, and then ultimately leaving the staging area at around 1900 or so and arriving at the site within about 24 hours. And I know I just said a lot, but that kind of lays it all out. If you maybe you get back and you look at the presentation, maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. But a lot going on there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the safety asset team mobilized. Where does the team on site come from? Are they a group of people that are already specified, trained, or
So the question is, where does the team on site come from?
So where does the sites team come from? Maybe I should put it like that. Not the SAFER teams, but the sites team. So that, again, they have their own teams that they build and would respond to this. But again, this response is even designed such that security guards as well as administrative type people could actually hook this equipment up and run it. But they do have teams. They do drill. But I think Dan and I were talking, at some point it may be all hands, whoever's available to respond to this thing. But in the normal day-to-day, how we practice for this thing, there are different teams that are stood up and they drill on this. Okay? All right, good question. All right, so a little bit here about SAFER support and training. There are the different positions that we maintain within the SAFER Control Center, and from the leads to the L&T coordinators, staging area coordinators, all these different things. We train at least 4 times a year drilling with tabletops and FedEx and helicopter companies, those sorts of things. Also, the training that we do have the technicians come in annually and we train them on operating the equipment. They run every equipment type. And yeah. Any questions on all the training? We have roughly about 80 people on the SAFER side response or in the SAFER response organization that are trained for this deployment. Okay. It takes about okay. So
are people
are
protected
people
from
secured?
radiation on site?
Are people secured from radiation on site? Again, the whole impetus of this approach is to prevent the event from damaging the reactor. Okay, letting the reactor get to a point to where it goes south. These are all this equipment, is the whole purpose is to get in there ahead of it and to prevent from having a radioactive release. That's been the whole plan as it's been laid out by the NRC. So we're not reacting to a radioactive release, we're preventing a radioactive release. Does that kind of make sense? We're mitigating the effects of the event. Okay, keeping those core functions operable, the core cooling, the containment, and the spent fuel pool. Okay? Great question. All right. All right, so I want to show you a video. Now, we talked about the Flex Phase 1, we talked about the Flex Phase 2, and we talked about the Flex Phase 3, the offsite emergency response. Hopefully, this video will tie it all together for you. This was developed by Exelon. Exelon is the largest operator or nuclear licensee of commercial reactors in the United States. They operate about 22 of them. And they'll talk about the different aspects, Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Okay, and then we'll take some more questions after that.
In March 2011, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear facility was struck by a massive earthquake and a tsunami that overwhelmed the site and its emergency systems. Since that event, the U.S. nuclear industry has changed its readiness approach for an extreme natural disaster. That solution is called FLEX. FLEX is a $4 billion industry effort to further strengthen U.S. nuclear facilities against natural disasters. The uniqueness of this strategy is that portable backup equipment designed to supplement a site's existing equipment can be deployed at a moment's notice. The Flex strategy uses the plant's installed backup equipment, on-site portable backup equipment, and additional off-site backup equipment which can be in place at any nuclear facility across the United States within 24 hours. That's an extraordinary turnaround. Flex adds yet another layer of protection to our plants. Exelon sites are well prepared for an extreme event, and what you'll see in this video is that Flex strategy at work. It is a well-orchestrated plan involving a nuclear site, industry agencies, and national response centers. We are committed to operating our plants safely and to protecting the public, the communities, and our employees.
Hi, this is Mike on Unit 1. We've had a loss of off-site power and our diesels have failed to start.
Within seconds, operators initiate their emergency plan. Every 6 weeks, they simulate situations like this and are well prepared for the real thing. In the unlikely event that power is lost, the plant's reactors shut down as they are designed to do. Exelon plants have a minimum of 2 backup diesel generators, which would start automatically to provide power. If all of those generators fail to start, then a multitude of backup batteries would kick in to provide power.
We have equipment that is always on standby and is always ready to 100% cover the core if necessary.
If something fails, then our Flex strategy provides a backup to the backup.
The Flex strategy starts when there is an extended loss of power to the plant, and all of the plant's backup generators fail to start.
All right, due to the extended loss of offsite power, we're going to implement the Flex strategies.
Plant operators inform the company emergency coordinators that the Flex strategy has started. They also contact industry organizations to get extra equipment from other nuclear plants. Emergency coordinators then contact SAFER, the control center for the industry's 2 national response centers in Memphis, Tennessee, and Phoenix, Arizona, which send even more equipment as backup. These centers are football field-sized warehouses that store additional Flex equipment for the nation's nuclear plants that can be dispatched at a moment's notice.
Timing is extremely critical. we have to have the first piece of equipment on site and connected to the plant and operating within 24 hours.
Trucks arrive to pick up preloaded equipment trailers. From here, the equipment travels to the affected site.
We want to have our first trailer on the road by 3 hours for sure.
Meanwhile, operators at the plant are already in motion. Each plant has its own flex building and backup equipment. The building's rebar reinforced concrete walls are nearly 2 feet thick, and the doors are covered with Kevlar, all of which protect the equipment inside from anything Mother Nature might throw at it. Equipment is mounted on trailers for easy transport. Backup equipment here and at the Safer warehouse includes pumps that can fill a backyard swimming pool in 5 minutes, about a quarter mile of industrial-grade fire hoses to carry water to the reactor, huge generators that can power plant safety equipment, and lights that can illuminate 5 acres. These pumps and generators use standard connectors so they can easily hook up to any external flex equipment brought to the site.
We bring our equipment out of here and we have pre-planned routes throughout the site, and the routes are based on speed, ability to get around fallen debris.
Inside the plant, operators monitor the reactor, plant systems, and conditions. Equipment is continually checked. They make sure the reactor and used fuel pools are being adequately cooled. Back at the response center, the first of the backup flex equipment begins to leave the warehouse. Meanwhile, all plant equipment is moved into place, hooked up, and is operational within 8 hours.
And then it all becomes the communication with those off-site facilities, making sure that that equipment is arriving and we understand when it's getting here so that we can phase in the longer-term equipment and phase out our initial flex equipment response.
The flex equipment from the response center begins to arrive at a staging area.
Every piece of equipment has to be below 8,000 pounds so that once it gets to a staging area, if there's no way they can get to the plant by road, they can be airlifted by helicopter.
Operators continue their actions as more portable flex equipment arrives and is staged. Everyone locally and across the country is on notice until the emergency is over. The flex equipment can keep the plant safe indefinitely.
The goal is to get power restored to the plant as quickly and efficiently as possible.
We've done the homework, we've done the logistics, we've done the coordination at the federal level, and we are very prepared.
We want folks to know that we're properly dealing with the situation at hand and that the plant is safe and the public is safe. No doubts whatsoever.
Okay, questions? Any questions?
So for those of you who are joining us online, please send an email if you have a question to siren@vt.edu.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, this is Gil Brown, Professor Emeritus in Nuclear Engineering from UMass Lowell. I apologize for not knowing more details, but the commission, the standing 5-member commission, just had a 3-2 vote on this flex plan. Can you sort of amplify that? What did they act on? Or am I just talking old news from a recent headline?
The one thing I am familiar with, I'm not sure if you're talking about I think the rule that they put out, but if it's the rule, I don't have any background on the rule, and that doesn't affect the response centers. One key decision that they did just make, though, was deciding whether we could support governmental agencies like federal and state agencies such as FEMA with some of this equipment if it were called upon. They did allow that. However, we still have to maintain at least one response center, a complement of equipment that's available to respond to any nuclear site in the United States. So they didn't drop the guard down. It was more so if you had say a hospital or something like that that really needed that 480 volt generator, you'd hate to tell them no, and you're the only piece of, that you're talking lives at stake here. So they did approve to do that. So we're still working through that. But
yeah,
okay.
Arun Maselli with the Red Cross Federation. I think the ruling was the tolerance of the plants to withstand certain natural events like floods, tornadoes, that type of thing, where there were a series of recommendations given for enhancing the plants, but the NRC decided that wasn't needed at this point.
Okay, so that's the one you're talking about. Yeah, that's more on the licensee side. Even though I work for Southern Nuclear, I'm not in that division of Southern Nuclear that handles the licensing aspect. So thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Lisa from the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. I was just wondering how often, or is it difficult to maintain the equipment, or is there like periodically you have to replace things, and is that
I was
going to
hoping
be a
you would ask
difficult
that
thing
question.
in the future? Or
So
to
thank you for
maintain
asking that. We actually run every piece of equipment quarterly. So every 3 months, each piece of equipment gets run. It goes through a 30-minute run time. We do all the checks. Every 3 years, we do performance tests on all the equipment, make sure that it's still hitting its output margins and all those different things that are required by the specifications. Pump curves, we test them on pump curves and all those different things every 3 years. But quarterly, we do run every piece of equipment. Again, that's to keep those seals lubricated and all those different things like that. But yes, there's a lot of work that goes into just maintaining the equipment. We spend a lot of money just keeping the thing up and operable, needless to say. Because you got to think of how many pieces of equipment we've got. We've got gas turbines. We've got 30 of those. And typically if you have a helicopter company, you have a whole team of mechanics that just keep those helicopter engines running. So we're always running gas turbines, and there are always tweaks to be made. Heaters fail, all kinds of stuff like that. But you're working through that to make sure this equipment's ready to be deployed on a moment's notice. And that's why you see the maintenance spare, right? Some of that equipment, I showed you the gas turbine up there, the blue one and the red one. The blue one is a 4160 megawatt, 4160 kilowatt. I'm not getting my terms right here. 1 megawatt, 4160 volt generator. That's a $750,000 unit. Okay, the red one is about 725. That's a 480 volt generator, and so we have maintenance spares on each one of those at both locations. So I got 1.5 million just in 4160 spares. Okay, so that's the whole impetus behind. If we have a problem, the other one goes up on the trailer. That one comes off, and we do the repairs on it and get it ready to go. So great question.
I would like to read an online question first. This is by Joseph Canny from the NRC. And he's talking about the Cooper site. How would fuel be delivered to a stranded site, such as Cooper, under current flooding conditions, if the site's day tanks are damaged or the fuel gets contaminated?
All right, so if the day tanks are damaged or the fuel is contaminated, we on the response side, we do have fuel bladders. They're 500-gallon fuel bladders that we can fly in there via helicopter, and those all go to each site, and so we can fly it in by helo.
You can?
We can, mm-hmm. That's right. They're 500-gallon bladders. They're military mil-spec type bladders that they're very unique pieces of equipment. You actually fill them up, and they look like a large piece of bologna, basically, but they're this big in diameter and probably 5 feet wide. And they have a yoke, and you can either fly it or you can actually drag it behind a bulldozer or a forklift or whatever you got across the ground. It just rolls full of fuel. So those are mil-spec type pieces of equipment. So good question.
I had a question about the teams. Could you say a little bit more about those? The maintenance folks obviously are at the centers all the time, I assume. But what about those 5 people you send with the equipment? Where do they come from? You mentioned at some point that you assemble the teams from all over the country. Where do
Great
they come
question.
from? How they are how
Great
are they
question.
trained, and how do they train together?
Okay, so again, that's one of the key partnerships of the alliance with Framatome. Again, as I was saying, Framatome supports nuclear outages at our reactors across the U.S. fleet every year, and so their reactor are nuclear site trained. Is probably the best way to put that on the access and all those different things. So those folks, these are guys like and ladies that do steam generator inspections, fuel movement, all those types of special technical type trained functions. Those folks are actually trained in the response of this equipment. So we bring them out to the response center in Memphis every June or July, and we actually send them through the training on how to operate this equipment. So all the way from connecting it up to actually running it and shutting it down, to checking all the parameters as far as your oils and fuel and all those different things. So we train them. It's a week-long training, and they run every piece of equipment. So those are the Framatome people that normally do outage work that are trained to run and operate this equipment. Great question.
And you can get them with the equipment within 24 hours?
Yes, yes. So that's a key aspect. Framatome has a outage control center, okay? And so if a site in the United States has an issue, emergent issue outside of an outage, they can call into Framatome's outage control center, and then they start aligning the people to support whatever that issue is going on at that point. Also, they have a crisis action team. And so they know where their people at are across the United States. They do on a regular basis move their people across from one site to the next. They have a corporate jet. They have all the infrastructure in getting hotels, cars, airline tickets, getting people moving across the United States. They have a whole team that's just what they do, okay? So wherever those people are at, this takes top priority in Framatome. That's under the contract, okay? We have top priority for personnel. Those personnel are pulled and moved into forward positions. So you got a whole team working through the logistics and getting them to that site. All the way to, we need the corporate jet. Okay, great question. Okay. Was there another question over here? I thought there may have been another question over here.
That was being asked.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. Other question?
Yeah, hello, David. Dan Miller. I'm a PhD candidate here at Virginia Tech. Excellent presentation, very thorough, the system appears to be. And I say that from a bit of military background that I have with things that are a bit like this, so I'm impressed. I did have a question. You talked about the things had to be generic, 70% had to be generic. Well, what about that other 30% where maybe a fitting or something wouldn't work? Is there interface adapters?
All right, so it's not so much it wouldn't work at their plant, they don't need it for their coping strategy at their plant. In other words, this piece of equipment is going to arrive at their plant, but they don't need it. It's probably going to sit over there on the side. Now, why is that? Why are they getting it anyway, even though they don't need it? Again, that was made more of a financial aspect, so that, again, this was a very fast-track project. We had to do all this in less than 18 months, all the way from concept to figuring out what equipment we were going to get every reactor or nuclear site in the United States to play, to building up response centers, to getting this equipment manufactured. Again, this was an extremely fast timeline. So the chief nuclear officers across the United States, to keep it from getting hung up, said 70% need it, everybody's playing, move. So it was one of those, it was really made from that standpoint. So, but again, what happens is when they call for their equipment, they don't get to pick and choose what's coming out of these National Safety Response Centers. They get all of the equipment. That's the only way we can make that 24-hour timeline. So the entire industry agreed when you make the call, you get it all. So, but again, back to your original question, it's not that it won't work at their plant or it won't connect to their plant, it's just they don't need it in their strategy to mitigate the event. That kind of help?
Yes, yes.
Good question.
And just, well, I've got the microphone. Something related. You have two response centers, so are you assuming you could respond to two side events at two separate at a time?
So here's what the NRC agreed to, or what they put to us. What it was that we had to have the ability to respond to two sites or 4 reactor units. That was what the NRC put to us. So each response center is capable of doing that on its own. Okay? One response center is redundant to the other response center. In case you have, say you had a massive dust storm in Phoenix that took out that response center. And it happens. It does happen. So Memphis is on deck, right? Say you have a massive or an ice storm that shuts the roads down in Memphis. It happens. We go through that about every year. Phoenix is on deck. So you've got 2 response centers that can support either one. When it's all said and done, if you had to deploy every piece of equipment, you could support about 10 reactors. Okay? But again, it's set up on supporting 4. Okay? But that's how much equipment. I mentioned 222 million gallons of water a day is what we can pump. That's a lot of water. That's moving a lot of water. 24,000 homes of power that we can supply. That's a lot of power. You know, the United States nuclear industry has stepped up to the plate when it comes to this response. They've taken it very serious.
So very adequate margin.
Very, very, very adequate margin. Remember, this is the cavalry aspect of it here. You had phase 1 design change. You had phase 2 on-site emergency equipment that each site has. All that on-site emergency equipment can be shipped across the United States. I don't know if you picked up on that in the video. So those sites can move equipment from one site to the next. It's all interchangeable. We all have standardized connections. It's like, hey, I need your pump. And they're like, it's coming. Here it comes, right? So there is a tremendous response that's available to each site in the United States from all the other sites as well. So, yes, sir.
I have another question, and then I'll give it to you. You mentioned the NRC gave you the number 4 reactors, right? That they wanted you to be able to respond to.
Well, that's what we worked out with the NRC. It's probably a better way to put it.
You worked that out?
Well, I didn't. No, I did not work that out. The industry worked that out.
Sure, but can you talk about why you ended up with this number 4?
Okay.
Why not 5? Why not 10?
All right. So a lot of that was based on EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute document on events moving across the United States and how many sites they're likely to affect. So if you're in this region, you got the blizzards, you've got this or what. If you're down here in the southern part of the United States, you have hurricanes, tornadoes, that kind of stuff. Maybe some seismic in around the Tennessee Valley area. And if you're over here, you have this. So they looked at it from a regional and what events typically occur based on historical data. I mean, it wasn't, you know, actually based on that. And that's how they honed in, as I understand it, on the number of sites that would be affected. So therefore, how many you'd likely need to support. Yes, sir.
Well, just pragmatically, you had the upfront cost to get everything up and going. How much was that? And what's the sort of the annual operating, if that's the right word, not operating for an emergency, but just maintaining?
What does it cost to run this thing on a yearly basis? You're probably looking around 90 to 100 million when it's all said and done. Just this phase of it. When it comes to annual operating, you're a little less than $10 million a year to operate this.
Per plant.
That's right. Divide by 100. That was why they came through the Pooled Inventory Management Program, which is under that Pooled Equipment Inventory Company that they established. That allowed them the ability to pool their resources and centralize, and all you take advantage of the same equipment versus each plant having to provide their own off-site equipment. So you can imagine what that cost would have looked like, and you know how you'd have to stand it up with all the maintenance personnel and all the storage and all this different. So this was why this program was selected. So great question.
60 sites, about 100 reactors.
That's right. You can kind of do the math and kind of see what it cost them a year. That's right.
And just a follow-on question to that: how long do you think you can justify keeping that program up without another emergency?
All right, I'm not sure I'm following that one.
You set up this program to respond to an emergency. Mm-hmm. What if there are no emergencies, big station blackouts? How long can you justify keeping this very expensive program operational?
All right, so here's the deal. It's an order by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It is an order. It's not an option. Okay, now that doesn't mean the industry might go back and say, hey, can we back off on some of this? That doesn't mean that that wouldn't occur. But if you want to operate a nuclear license or a nuclear reactor in the United States, you have to be a member of this and have this off-site emergency equipment or have your own off-site emergency equipment. Okay, but all reactors in the United States are part of this program. So it's an order. Good question.
So we're a big country. It's not like in Europe where a lot of countries, but we do have a Canadian border. Can we support the Canadian plants?
As it stands right now, they are not a member of the program. Okay. Now, if it all went south tomorrow, I can tell you there are going to be a lot of phone calls being made, and we will take the direction that the United States chief nuclear officers give us. Because remember, they're the ones that paid for all this equipment, this whole program, as well as what the NRC will allow us to do.
Well, let me ask it differently. Do you know if there's any international work in this area to support each other? I mean, and Canada comes to mind locally. They have plants on the Great Lakes.
That's right.
Wind blows south.
That's right.
So, do you know if there are any work in harmonizing between the two?
I can tell you what the little bit I know is we have done some work with Laguna Verde, okay, Mexico. All right. We've also talked to the CANDU plants in Canada. Now, but it really hasn't gotten to the point where we've moved to, hey, do you want to participate in this program? Because there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of issues with the NRC that would have to be worked through on who this can support. Again, the NRC is worried about, of course, the United States reactors. So it's never moved past the dialogue station, is what I would say. But it's been mentioned many, many times. If it all went south tomorrow, my guess is going to be a lot of calls made, and you'll probably see equipment moving. I'm not sure. I wasn't at the RIC. I don't get to rub elbows with some of these that get to go to the RIC.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
So my question is, you mentioned the purpose is safer, but mostly to prevent an accident, meaning an off-site radioactive release. I'm curious, are there any interesting considerations for if you're coming on scene after an off-site release has already occurred or when one is in progress?
So what would happen if you did have an on-site? This equipment's still moving forward, okay? But the whole purpose of the program and the whole way out to the NRC was that this is to mitigate the event. But even if you did have a radioactive release for whatever god-awful reason, the equipment's still moving forward to these sites. Okay, so good question.
Another follow-on question to you. But do you then have equipment to protect the teams, for example, in helicopters or the people moving into those staging areas from radiation?
That is a great question. No, we do not. The U.S. industry decided not to provide personnel protection for radiation, be it mask, Tyvek suits, all those different things. We went through all of that, and again, the whole purpose was this is to mitigate, keep us from ever going there. The sites do have all that on site. You have tons of that stuff on site, though. So that would just be brought outside to whoever is going in to ensure you had personnel protection. So they elected not to put it in the response center. A lot of turnover, shelf life items on that kind of stuff. That's why they were like, we're not buying all that stuff. So, good question, though. Okay.
Any other questions, comments? All right. If not, please join me in thanking David for a fascinating presentation.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all for having me. Good to meet you. Hi, David Crawley. So good to meet you.
I know that this is good stuff. I think the commission vote, the top level that I read, it was criticized somewhere. I saw it.